let's move on. I'd like to introduce Professor Michael Mascolo of Merrimack College in Massachusetts. I first saw Mike lecture, I think, or speak at the conference in 1995 in Barcelona. And I was immediately struck by his brilliance and his energy and his knowledge, particularly of developmental issues and intersubjectivity. So I might make a little plug that Sabrina and I and Mike have just had published our paper on intersubjectivity, joint action, and sociality, which you are instructed to study in great detail after the session. Right, so Mike, I think you're going to give us a little talk on, what was it again?
Well, I'll share my screen. I'll say what it is in a few seconds. Well, I can do that now. Harry, thank you for your kind introduction. I appreciate it so very much. And I want to thank my colleagues for all the work that they put into this, organizing this. We've been meeting, this time, Thursdays for months, haven't we, to organize this thing. And Harry has been at the front of the organizational process.
I've been bullying them.
With all of his gentle, kind, loving anxiety. It's been lovely. So, okay, I will talk mostly informally. The idea is to give you a sense for the the types of talks that we're hoping that people give, and that is to say that they that they will be more informal, if you will. It could be as informal or as formal as you'd like, so it's open. I'm not quite sure how long I'll be talking today, probably 20-25 minutes, and then after that we'll have breakout sessions in which people can talk about issues raised by it or anything else, and then we'll have a discussion amongst all of us. So let me begin. The place of constructivism and PCP in society and in the human sciences. Constructivisms. So I want to talk about the different forms of constructivism and their relevance in academia, the relevance in psychology today. And what I've got here is a 2x2 a grid here. And on the left side, we've got individual constructivisms that focus on the personal or the individual. And on the right, we have the more socio and cultural sorts of constructivisms. And along the other axis, we can say a distinction between more abstract and decontextualized versions of constructivism and more embodied or contextualized conceptions. And so this will be a quasi-historical grid as well. So we start with Kant. In the upper left-hand corner, a much more individualist thinker, if you will, and constructivist in the sense that, well, we know we can't be in touch with the reality of the world as it is. We can only be understand phenomena through already existing ways of organizing the world. For Kant, those ways were given at birth, but he made a distinction between mind and world, if you will, and the structures of the mind, if you will, allow us to make sense out of the world. Another forerunner, strangely enough, was Hegel. Hegel, he the author of the architect of the dialectical triad between thesis, antithesis, and synthesis that Kelly will draw upon dialectics in a big way. Hegel, I'm putting him a little more on the cultural side because he talked about historical movements in the thesis, antithesis, synthesis type of a movement. And clearly here, what we've got is the construction of systems of being and systems of knowing in history. Both of these come together in the form of Piaget. Piaget, one of the seminal constructivists who brings together Kant and brings together Hegel to have his stage theory, if you will. And if you will, these little boxes that I'm going to show you show the the range of the various theories. They're not going to be perfect, but the idea of the boxes is to show that they span. So for Piaget, even though he's more on the individual side with his notion of equilibration and how it is that mental structures, quote unquote, develop, he spans all the way from the embodied to the abstract. For him, remember that psychological functioning begins with sensory motor action, and everything develops out of sensory motor action to concrete representations to more abstract and universalizing representations. So that constructivism comes from those folks. And then on the other hand, Hegel, of course, is a predecessor of Marx, and Marx is the predecessor of sociocultural types of thinkers, including Vygotsky, who maintained that mental structures of thinking, or psychological structures, I prefer to refer to them, have their origins in social relations, not necessarily in individual processes. For Vygotsky, again, what happens is that our psychological structures arise in two planes. First, on the social plane, the sociocultural plane, in our interactions between people, as we interact with each other using signs and words, which are vehicles of culture. We internalize those social relations, and our mental structures are in that way socially formed. Piaget would have a very similar view, and there's always been a very lovely, wonderful tension between these two, if you want to call Vygotsky's constructivist thinkers. Nietzsche is a curious character, as we know, and Nietzsche is in many ways a forerunner to postmodernism. The idea that that thinking and our meaning systems are really metaphors and metonyms, and figurative language penetrates our thought through and through, is really one of the major precursors of postmodernism and social constructionism. As we know, the idea that, again, language as a vehicle of culture structures our meaning systems, and that therefore our meaning systems have their origins in social and cultural activity rather than in individual or personal activity. Which brings us to Kelly. Kelly, I'm putting here over on the individual side. Yet, even being in the individual side, he has great applicability and great extendability, if you will, throughout these four quadrants. It's still limited, I would say, but and I'll have more to say about his contributions, obviously, in a few minutes. From Kant and others, we get radical constructivism, a very much more individualistic frame in many ways. Watzlawick would be an example of that. Von Glaserfeld would be another, and they are predecessors of others that we'll be talking about soon. But for these folks, the constructionist process, the constructed process, is much more individual. People are closed systems, if you will. But we'll have more to talk about that later on. Piaget, over time, gives rise to the Neo-Piagetians, and people like Kelly and postmodernists bring about somebody like Herbert Hermans, the dialogical version of constructivism. The idea that, very similar to postmodernism and Vygotsky, that our ways of being in the world, ourselves, have their origins in social relations. But if you know about Hermans, you know that he thinks of the self, and he thinks of he thinks of the social selves, if you will, as inner agencies, as inner dialogue, we having dialogues among multiple representations of self within ourselves and within our imaginations. So I'm putting him more on the individual side, but we could see that it's an influence by both of these traditions. With radical constructivism, we get folks like Maturana and Varela. Now we're getting into the much more embodied approach, and which leads us, if you will, very much to some of these more recent approaches, which build upon these constructivisms, if you will. Maturana, Varela, Evan Thompson. And I would say that these traditions here are bringing forth these various constructivisms, but in an embodied and embedded way. Much more attention is being paid to the body, to the biological body, and its ecological ecosystem, if you will. Hermeneutics and relationality, the idea that we can't separate the individual, if you will, from its social context and its biological context, that knowing is a process of moving back and forth between parts and wholes. And I think hermeneutics is very much represented in Chiara's work in personal construct theory. And relationality, I think, is much more embedded in the work of Harry Proctor, and their book, and in Winter and Proctor and Winter's book that's coming out on relational construct theory, for example. I think, which I take to be a fundamental moving forward of constructivism that brings forth the more personal approach with the more social constructionist and even phenomenological approaches. For relational developmental theory, we have, again, we're putting together the cultural and the individual and the embodied all together. And this is shown in recent versions of what might be called enactivism. De Paola, Sean Gallagher, and work like that, which again stresses the interpenetration of the organism and the biological and social cultural environment, the inseparability of them while maintaining both autonomy and relatedness. And at least this is where I see a lot of the exciting work that moves us forward. So this is a landscape, if you will, of at least my representation of the various constructivisms that exist. No doubt there are more, and no doubt I've made mistakes in how I've represented them on this two-dimensional figure. Now, Kelly and PCP and its relevance to society and to the human sciences. So if we're back here, well, where does Kelly fit into all of this? Is he still relevant? Is constructivism still relevant? Strengths of Kelly, and I see several major ones. One, Kelly's theory is one of the most, one of the very few, and one of the very few lingering, if you will, integrative theoretical frameworks. It's a theory. If it's not a theory, it's at least a framework. It hangs together. It brings everything together into a single whole. It's something I value so very deeply, and as such, it embraces a holism of the person. It's called personal construct theory. It's about the person at the level of person. I'm recalling Bannister's wonderful book on inquiring man, inquiring personhood, perhaps it should be called. Holism and the anti-fragmentalism. Our field of psychology is so deeply fragmented. You know, open up an introductory psych book, and you get the person divided up into, 25 different pieces, and none of those pieces come together. Well, they come together in Kelly's approach in a big way, which I think is so sorely needing and continues to be needed today. And its flexibility, its applicability, its extendability. Although Kelly doesn't talk about everything, his ideas in many ways, I think, are very much extended and applicable to the broad range of concerns that we think about when we think about psychology. And those are stellar and wonderful strengths, and I'm going to mention some more strengths later. But in the context of these strengths, there are some risks. There are some risks and challenges. One would be the threat of insularity. The threat of insularity. When you have an integrative theoretical framework that's got its own language, and it's got its own constructs, etc., well, it doesn't really quite fit in to the mainstream in many ways, especially if the mainstream is defined in terms of all these little fragmented parts, where people are very much concerned or able to look at the left earlobe and study the left earlobe or the letter A for their entire existence, and then never get to the letter B or the right earlobe. And so there's a tendency toward insularity in the sense that it's hard to look outside of the theory quite often, and people who are outside of the theory are maybe don't want to embrace the whole thing, which they feel that they may have to do if it's an integrative framework. And even though there's applicability and extendability, given the fact that it is an integrative theoretical framework with its own language, etc., there may be the risk of intellectual conservatism, if you will. The idea, if you will, that how much do we change Kelly's theory would be a question. I mean, how much is Kelly's? It's been 65 years since he wrote his theory. Is there a neo-Kellian theory? Has it been transformed in some way that is significant? And I've mentioned some ways in which I think it has been, in the hermeneutic approach and the relational approach. But nonetheless, if you have an integrative theoretical framework, it often sets up divisions when the mainstream is much more fragmented. So what's the relevance of Kelly, given these challenges? And I want to talk about that. I want to talk about the following. But first, let me again state what I think to be his home base and what is so remarkably important and remains important about Kelly's approach. And well, let's start with a person, self. And let's say immediately, if we're going to be construing ourselves, well, we have constructs. Let's say teacher-student construct, teacher-student construct. And if we have constructs, well, they're not just isolated constructs, they're systems of constructs. So that if I'm a teacher, well, the teacher concept or the construct is superordinating other constructs, like I'm knowledgeable. Well, I'm knowledgeable. What's the alternative to being knowledgeable? Well, of course, the alternative to being knowledgeable is to be dumb and not knowledgeable. Well, maybe not if you're a teacher, though. Maybe if you're a teacher, the alternative to being knowledgeable is being a sham. And this is, in my opinion, one of the most stellar and important things about Kelly's theory is its capacity to define knowledge dialectically, where either pole of that knowledge is defined by the other pole. So that knowledgeable versus not knowledgeable, smart versus dumb, is different than knowledgeable versus I'm a sham. And then there's others. Teacher has to be responsible. Of course, the alternative to irresponsible is irresponsible. Well, it doesn't have to be. It could be free. The alternative to responsibility is I'm free. I remember Jerome Kagan when he retired. He said, "Oh, the thing that I don't miss about my work is having to write grants to support my graduate students." He was free. And then the self, the teacher, you and me, we also, along this teacher-student construct, which subordinates others, we have conceptions of the student. The students can be hardworking or needy. They may need a lot from us if they're not hardworking. Or they may be hardworking and afraid of failure. And that may be another dimension of students. And then we get a self. We have a self, our self, that is composed of this hierarchical system of constructs, of meanings that are defined dialectically in personal ways, where the dialectic is so important because it gets at the uniqueness and the personalness of ways of construing. And of course, we also have the other. And we have the student, let's say. We have the student. The student also has a teacher-student construct. But that's going to be a very different teacher-student construct than ours. The student is going to be thinking of the teacher as either hard or easy, or exciting or boring. And for students, what's that? Not hardworking or needing. It's work hard versus have fun, or I fail versus I succeed. And again, what do we have here? We have this beauty of this capacity to represent personal meanings in ways that go beyond the conventional wisdom of what words mean in general. And of course, for me, one of the very most important and wonderful things about Kelly's theory is this notion of sociality. That if I'm going to play a social role with you, I've got to construe what you're thinking. I got to construe your meaning system. And vice versa. And this, I'm going to say, is one of the most important aspects of Kelly's theory that I think has the contribution to society and to the human sciences, especially now. Of course, even in the context of sociality, you've got this two-ness, if you will, this bidirectionality, this dialecticism. In Kelly's theory, it's still more, I would argue, an individualist type of theory than a relational type of theory. He stresses very much you know, again, what's the individual? What's the individual meaning systems? And while I find that to be a stellar positive, I also find that to be something that might need to be extended. And I'll talk about how. So, more strengths. The process of construction, that we construct, is a very important element that he can continue to give to our field. The structure and content of personal construing, dialecticism, and for me, this is so very important in our time now, sociality and credulity. This, for me, at this particular juncture of our cultural development, in the context of massive polarization of culture and politics, massive fragmentation in the world, increasing tensions between sides, where people are simply not able to hear each other because different people are defining themselves in us versus them terms, moralizing us versus them terms. If I believe X, I am morally superior to you, and you must be crazy if to believe the things that you believe. I believe this is probably the most important thing that Kelly can give us. So, in the spirit of a holistic conception of personhood, let me talk about where I think, given that strength, it is important to extend PCP. And then I want to go back to its home strengths and talk about how I think it's still deeply relevant. So, what are the ways in which we extend PCP? Well, what do you have here is the self, we have the other, and what's so strong about PCP is that we're able to get at these remarkable subtleties of personal meaning systems. Well, one thing I think that we can do more on is emotion, is affect. And frankly, I think that, and I think that Kelly's view of emotion is, again, very, very prescient. And, you know, the idea of emotion as the experience of acting or impending change. Emotion is a part of the entire organism. It's not some little module that you put over there. That's why these are overlapping in my thing here. So that, you know, you have a holistic conception of emotion. Nonetheless, I think that affect, there's much work going on in affect, and I think that that the role of emotion in construct theory is something that can be extended, especially with the bidirectionality, that emotion is central and important for all intentional action. Even mathematics, everything we do is organized by emotion, and our meanings systems organize emotion, and emotion organizes meaning. I think that there's more to pay attention to there. Neuroscience and evolutionary psychology are providing all types of challenges to constructivism, both healthy challenges and very, very nefarious challenges, in my view. Evolutionary psychology is on the rise. It is increasingly dominant. In my opinion, it is thwart with a suite of difficult and dubious assumptions about the evolutionary origins of innate kind of psychological structures, if you will. And so as a result, evolutionary psychology provides a deep challenge to the idea of construction. And many things that we might want to say are constructed through relations over time, evolutionary psychologists want to put right inside of the individual right from the start. And I think that this is a deep mistake. Nonetheless, if constructivism has anything to say to that, we're going to have to, I think, embrace a neuroscience to see, to understand how it is that construction, the process of personal and social construction, how they are mediated by intelligent neuroscience. You need good psychoscience before you have good neuroscience. It's not the other way around. You don't go from neuroscience to psychological science. It can't be done, in my opinion. So we need to have a clearer understanding of the role of biological processes in the as the substrata of psychological processes, so that we have better ways of dealing with the more difficult issues raised by evolutionary psychology. In that regard, we should be open, I think, to what it is that is constructed and what meanings are biologically canalized. And so more discussion or analysis of the relation between the psychological construction and the neurobiological substrata, I think, is something that is important. Relationality and intersubjectivity. Again, my feeling is that in Kelly's theory, much of it is personal. Again, it's got great extendability. Yes, it does allow us to talk about relations and how therapy transforms us, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But our focus is often here, rather than here. And that is to say, rather than in the real-time co-regulation between people. What's happening in the moment? How are meanings becoming constructed through language, through our emotional relating between people in the moment over time? So this is where intersubjectivity comes in. How is it that we are intersubjective beings? I would argue that we are intersubjective beings as much as we are personal beings, and that one doesn't come before the other. And so it would be a mistake, if you will, to privilege either the individual over the relational or the relational over the individual. And finally, again, Kelly's theory allows for all of this, but culture, technology, and symbolism. How does culture and technology and symbolism transform our personal meaning systems? Can we see what we do in our discipline as looking at the process by which meaning and affect are coordinated between people within a cultural setting mediated by shared meanings and contested meanings? This would be an even more holistic psychology, I believe. But still, let's go back home. I always feel that whenever I go back to Kelly's theory, I'm coming home. I always feel like I'm coming home. And why do I feel like I'm coming home? I feel like I'm coming home because Kelly's theory offers me at least something that most others do not. I become stunned more and more at the extent to which people, the importance of sociality and the importance of how people are, in some sense, this is maybe even be a contradiction between what I was saying before, locked into their own perspectives. Locked into their own perspectives. This is one of the reasons why I'm so impressed with this Padua conference coming up. What is it? The tension between love and threat? My God, that is the issue of our times, I would say. Threat. Are we threatened? We cannot know the other. We cannot know the other and love the other. We can't engage into sociality unless we deal with this question of threat, and we can't feel threat and respond to threat unless we have sociality. Very important. So I'm stunned by how so many of our problems have to do with a sense of certainty and rectitude about our own personal meaning systems and our lack of being open to the personal meaning systems and social meaning systems of other people. And I think that this is the place where Kelly's theory really shines and can really help us. So again, these things here, let me tell you about a project that I'm doing that leads me to this important idea, in my view, that sociality and the capacity to represent the meaning systems of the self and the other is the fundamental thing, a fundamental thing that Kelly gives human sciences and society. I'm doing a study. I'm doing some work on a project that I'm calling Creating Common Ground. It's a project designed to teach people how to have political conversations, to actually make political progress through the process of teaching collaborative problem solving and conflict resolution in political circles. Sandy Burbach is part of this project as well. And what we have is a training system, if you will, where we're going through 2 rounds of training, or 2 different types of training. The first one is we teach people to recognize the humanity of the other person. We teach people to understand the interests that underlie different political positions. In other words, sociality. We teach people to separate the other person's political position from their underlying interests and meanings and beliefs. That's sociality. And the process begins by rejecting people's political positions as relevant and focusing on their interests, their underlying beliefs, their underlying needs, and an attempt to create novel solutions to long-standing problems by meeting all the needs of people in a conflict, rather than taking sides and trying to fight it out. This is the first phase of our training, and it brings you pretty far, but doesn't bring you the entire way, because we focus on underlying needs. We separate positions from needs, and we try to, like a conflict resolution process, ask ourselves, how can we develop new solutions that meet the needs of both people, of both parties, and the sides on the abortion, or on the sides of Black Lives Matter versus Blue Lives Matter, or economic issues, or gun laws, or what have you. But what happens is you meet right up against a problem. This can only take you so far, this phase 1. And you run up against the problem of ideology, that not all solutions can be resolved just by focusing on underlying needs, because those needs themselves become ideologically structured. And when that happens, well, I say you got to confront the ideologies themselves. You have to understand your ideology. You got to understand the ideology of the other. Again, sociality. And then the process becomes one of seeking the kernel of truth in the ideology of the other. That's sociality. Can you seek the kernel of truth in the ideology of the other? The position of the other person whose position you hate, can you identify any kernel of truth there? And if you can, it may be possible to begin to accommodate the truths of your truths and their truths while maintaining your core identity to create new, shareable ideologies. So it looks like this. So you got ideology 1, ideology 2, they clash. What's the truth in the other? What's the truth in the other? Maybe I can split mine up a bit. They clash. What's the truth of the other? I accommodate to the other, and maybe we can create a new synthesis that will transcend that division. That's where I want to go. Not there yet. But what I want to show you is, again, this is nothing new here. This is not going to be earth-shattering, but it is, I hope, will be illustrative of the importance of sociality and the Kelleyan idea that, you gotta be credulous. You gotta look into the meaning system of the other with credulity and not rejecting. So when the person says something that you see as crazy, can you look even harder? Can you bracket your own position even harder? And so this is an actual transcript of part of our training session. And it's between me and one of the more conservative leaning individuals in the group. And it's about abortion. And what I want to show you here is this discussion and the forms of sociality that come from it. Both in me, where my sociality was challenged over and over again, and her sociology was challenged, even though I don't think that she saw it. So let me show you. This is me. M is me. Could you tell me what your beliefs are about abortion? This is A. Oh, I believe that life begins at conception. Basic life begins at conception. I believe that sometimes women get into positions of, oh my goodness, they're pregnant. They didn't expect it. They didn't want it. They didn't. But that doesn't mean that you need to have an abortion. There are so many options out there. Adoption, 1,000%. There are so many people, so many couples that want to have babies. You have the baby and you give the baby up for adoption. And I do believe life begins at conception. Okay. Note some of the fragmentation in there, the moving back and forth for different rationales, but that's okay. Me. Now, what I'm going to do here as the smart intellectual, I'm going to attempt to introduce internal contradictions to her system. I want to get her to articulate her system better by introducing inner contradictions, so that she'll have to resolve those contradictions for herself. And hopefully that will create development. Sociality. Okay, so would it be your position that abortion under all circumstances should not be legal? So I'm being very clever here. Under all circumstances, of course she's going to say it should be illegal under some circumstances. Yeah, she says. Okay, does that include under conditions of rape? Yes, okay, and I'm going to say because my sister-in-law and her mom were raped, and I have to say, Tom, my sister-in-law's brother, an awesome guy, understands where he came from, is a pro-life guy. His mom, Lauren, she's a pro-lifer. And she has this wonderful child and needs a great son who cares about how he came into the world. He's a wonderful person. Every life matters. In other words, even under conditions of rape. And I'm surprised. Another attempt by me. So, would it also extend to the life of the mother? That if the life of the mother were threatened, would you believe that birth should go forward if the life of the mother was threatened? Well, maybe. So let me tell you, I was 40 and they said, you know, what about your health? And I said, I don't care. I don't believe in an abortion. And I got my baby at 40. Here I am being clever again. What if there are complications? I had complications. What if there were complications and there was a life-threatening event and you're on the table and I had life-threatening complications? I did. Everything I say, she's coming back with, no, not with arguments necessarily, but with actual situations, actual embodied events that she has dealt with in her concrete experience. Okay, all right, good. So what I'm hearing you say so far is that you are against abortion because you believe that every life matters. Every life matters. Every life matters. And now I'm going to get her now. I'm going to get her to change her. I'm going to get her to develop now. And let me summarize. If every life matters and the innocent life matters, yes, that would apply regardless of whether it was a condition of rape or threat to the mother. I'm summarizing. Okay. So every life matters. Please help me understand what you think. If every life matters and you have a conflict between the life of the mother and the life of the unborn child, if every life matters, how does that decision get made if both lives matter? How do you decide which life to save? So, you know, she says, I was sort of put in that position and I didn't want to not have my child. I said, okay, I'm understanding that. But what I want to know is, that's a decision you made. Yes, but they pushed me. They pushed me to have an abortion. So what I'm asking for is a principle I'm trying to figure out, I said. She said, they pushed me. They said, oh my goodness, you shouldn't have this challenge. And my girlfriend Jane was the same way. She had an Rh negative baby and they pushed her. Okay, if both lives matter, what is it that would make sacrificing the life of the mother, whose life matters, what would make that acceptable? Whereas sacrificing the life of the unborn child, who you're saying whose life matters, is not acceptable. How does that work in your mind? So, well, I believe, obviously, no, it's the mom. I made the choice. My friend Alexandria made the choice when she became pregnant after having cancer. And they said, you can't just continue your cancer treatments. And she said, stop the treatments. I don't care. I want to have this baby. My friend Jane, who has an Rh negative baby, like I think our medical profession is too quick to say abort. I just don't think it's right. Okay, I'm with you. Let me summarize. So you feel as though that both lives matter and medical professions put too much pressure on people. And you feel very, very strongly that it was your choice to have the child and you wanted the child and you're willing to take the risk. Yes. Okay, my final attempt. Excellent. Now, what if there were a woman who was not willing to make that risk? What if there was a woman who felt, like you did, that all of the life of the child matters more than her life matters, and that she resolves this conflict by choosing to abort her fetus? who is not yet born. Would that be wrong, given what you've said? I struggle with that only because I just named three: Jane, Alexandria, and me. We were pushed to have an abortion. Pushed, and we didn't, and Jane has Daniel, Alexandria has Sapphire, and I have Sal. So I just can't wrap my head around a woman who wants to have a child willing to abort that child. Now, for me, that's fascinating. Why is that fascinating? I tried each time to understand her ideas and to help her to develop those ideas, if you will, the smart intellectual, by introducing conflict. Each conflict into her system was not responded with, and I was happy by this, by some argument. It was responded with experience, that her experience, and over and over and over again, I was surprised by that. So that my sociality, my beliefs about abortion were being challenged over and over and over again. My most clever gambits here were failing, and they were failing in honest ways. I took that this was a woman who felt what she was feeling so deeply that she was willing to risk her life to have this kid. And then when asked about a woman who was not willing to risk her life, says, I can't wrap my head around a woman who wants to have a child willing to abort that child. In the end, when she couldn't resolve this conflict, I would suggest to you, that's Eric Clapton, she went back to her own experience. No principle. I can't wrap my head around it. I just can't see it. I have no sociality with that other woman. So I'm being challenged over and over by her. But I would suggest here, she's reached the limits of her own sociality, her own capacity for sociality. So for me, what about the complications? If there was a life-threatening event, you're on the table. I had life-threatening events. I did over and over and over again, an embodied reaction that informs her strong conviction. But for her, in my opinion, I think that she's got a conflict here that she hasn't yet dealt with that shows the limits of her sociality. She can't get into the experience of someone who would want a child but still be willing to abort it, even under life-threatening circumstances. Now, what all this says to me is, again, one, look how far apart we were. Look at our own personal meaning systems. Look at how we're not communicating, or how people generally do not communicate about abortion and other issues. This, in my opinion, is real communication, or at least an attempt at real communication, where, you know, my sociality is being extended. I'm trying to extend hers, haven't been very successful yet, but we planted the seed. We'll see what happens. The point here is not to try to convince her to be pro-life, or for her to convince me to be pro-choice. It's to try to resolve that dilemma in a way that would be meet the needs of both people. Whether that's possible remains to be seen. But my point is that Kelly's theory, although PCP may not claim to be a complete model of human functioning, it is relevant to both society and human sciences in some of the most deepest ways possible. And for coming home to Kelly means to me is you're always looking at the personal construction system of the other with credulity, even the personal construct system of the other whose positions you may hate, find morally repulsive, find crazy. If you look at their systems and say, hey, this may make sense to them, if they don't, even if it doesn't make sense to you, that way of thinking is deeply needed in our society, and Kelly's theory can provide it.
Mike,
thank you for listening.
thank you so much for that. Sandy Burbach is going to chair, as it were, the discussion now. There's only about 15 minutes left, so bear with us, but I'm sure it's what will happen will be good.
So in the setting, I gave them 60 seconds to really close their discussions. So
yeah,
22 seconds left.
This is terrifying, this countdown.
we're all going to apply for jobs at NASA after this.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hey, David.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
My apologies to the people in my group. I aborted prematurely. I didn't mean to do that.
Hi, Ken. Nice
So
to see
now
you.
everyone is beamed back.
Could you do us a favor and just mute yourselves for a minute so we don't get major feedback? Thanks. This next bit, we're quite pushed for time. I'm very aware of that. But we'd really like some feedback from you on how you found the breakup rooms, as well as the discussion about Mike's paper. So if you can sort of interweave those two themes, that would be really helpful. This is really just a discussion. It's not a huge question and answer session, but what we would like to suggest is that if people would like to continue the discussion, or you would actually enjoy having more of a development of the themes that Mike's picked up, we'd like to set up some kind of email communication between all of us. So if you've got things that you think you really would like to give and you don't have time today, don't feel like you've been ignored or pushed out in any way, we want to make an extra forum for that discussion, and we probably will do this with most papers, to be honest, because the time is limited in this format. So is there anybody from any of the discussion groups who'd like to raise the comments or make a comment or ask Mike something?
I think it would have been lovely to have more time for the discussion. I mean, double the amount of time that we have, particularly if it wasn't at the cost of the main speaker's chat. I mean, I'm in the position now, if this was a conference, of wanting to meet up in the bar and carrying on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, a problem there was that the speaker went on too long. He didn't know that he was going on so long, but he deserves to be chastised. So thank you,
Well,
Debbie.
you'll notice that Mike likes to use the third person and
have
his
double the time.
self-characterization. Sorry, Debbie.
He deserves to have double the time. Absolutely fascinating. That's why we wanted to go on and on chatting about it.
Well, we thought that if we made these Zoom sessions too long, it would, people, you know, they have incredibly busy lives. We all do, even me in retirement. So it's a bit of a balance, but we could go to 2 hours every time, possibly every time, but let's see.
Really depends on what we as a group decide and what you definitely as attenders decide you would like to have happen. Because this has basically got to be something that's useful to everybody. One of the main things we wanted to do was actually find a way of getting people who maybe never speak to each other or only ever see each other on paper to be able to meet and possibly lay some seeds for cross-fertilization and working, you know, in allied fields or something. I mean, the best thing would be if some papers came out of this and ended up at Padua. That would be lovely. No pressure, but conversation can be had, definitely.
I don't know how much of a management issue it would be, but I wonder if a listserv might be, an opt-in listserv might be set up such that where we kind of mutually agree that the primary purpose of that listserv would be follow-on discussion and conversation from the prior meetup. And
that's what
you know, I know it's easy enough to ignore those if I'm too busy and so forth, but or just, you know, didn't make the last meeting and don't want to follow that one, especially if I know I'm not missing something crucial for a future one.
Well, I think that's really what we're after. So we will try.
Our breakout group got very interesting very quickly and didn't quite have enough time. But we particularly focused on clinical setting, which I think we kind of had in common. which was really useful. But one of them, it was a fascinating talk, and I think it was really useful. But I think we particularly picked up on the idea of the importance of a credulous approach, and that unless we assume that the position of the other has some kind of intrinsic meaning or purpose or value, even if we can't understand what it is at the beginning, we're going to really struggle to make our relationships and our societies work. So I thought it was kind of starting to emerge, but we didn't have much time. So yeah, it'd be great to continue.
That's a lovely point. Thank you. That's very helpful. Anybody follow on from that? What came out of some of the other groups?
Maybe not quite follow on, but one of the things we talked about slightly in our group was a little bit about the emotion side of it and the implications of that emotion within there. We had sort of two strands. One, I'll say, was a little bit around Kelly's concept of holding contradictory thoughts within our mind as that corollary at the same time. So Michael's discussion and interaction with A was around there, and about the fact that that was her superordinate construct, was the baby's more important than me and my life, so I don't understand your question and where you're coming from. My paraphrasing of parts of that conversation, and linking that in with Mildred McCoy's comments about emotion and fear and threat being the size and scale of impact on your core sense of identity rather than anything else. So that's where we were cut off with Alexandro in mid-flow almost.
Oh, apologies, Alessandro. Somebody else? France, did you want to say something?
About our group, Teslie? Have you already said something about our group?
Go ahead.
I'm trying. Yeah, I was voted spokesperson for our group. So we spent a little bit of time just like getting to know each other, talking a bit about, I guess, our feelings around what's going on in the world at the moment. Mm-hmm. And I did make a very quick, I guess, semi-flip comment about how we would get any kind of sociality with hashtag 45, given the state of things in the US. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think that was about all.
Yeah, I think that's what we did.
Yeah.
How were there any? Sorry, Sally, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it sounds possibly as if our group were largely focused on a slightly different bit. We were quite intrigued. We were talking about the process of that conversation that you shared with us, Michael, which in some ways was straight sociality. You know, how does this fit with that, and what about this, and what have you? But also that interesting bit that you were putting in your brackets about, you know, now I'm going to introduce some challenge or whatever it was. So we got quite interested in that. You know, what was that process, and what are we, you know, how does that work and stuff like that. So just thought you might like to know.
Yes, we ended up talking about this notion of, you know, the core truth of the position of the person whom you cannot possibly think your way through to understanding, you know, whether sociality is failing for yourself. And we got onto the notion of, you know, how you handle, on the one hand, resistance to change, or on the other hand, Kelly's notion of functional fixedness of a person's position. What does it mean for them to adhere to this position, which on the face of it is, you know, just bizarre? And that's the point at which we were brought back to the whole group. So there's a universal truth that we weren't able to get at because we had to come back and join everyone else.
Email it to us. And then we can debate the universal truth.
Well, I just thought the emphasis on sociality and the credulous approach was such an important main issue for us all to attend to that has not been developed. And I thought your work along those lines was getting us in the right direction.
Do you think that's the core realization that's come out of the discussions? Does that feel like the core insight that's come out of that paper, that presentation?
Can I jump in, because I was in the conversation with Devi, and I think that's one of the things that came out, but I think where we were feeling our way to, and I was really interested in the last line of Michael's presentation of the conversation exchange, was that actually ultimately, when pushed and pushed and pushed, that woman got to a position where she could not justify the construct or justify the position other than, look, this is just who I am. And there's something that I saw in what Michael was doing, which is he's pushing more and more, not just at how she understands abortion, but ultimately taken down to something fundamentally about an aspect of herself that she could not rationally justify. She just had to say, look, you just have to accept this is who I am. This is how, you know, not from reasoning or whatever, but just from my own embodied experience. This is where I'm effectively invested. And I thought that was really interesting, because that last sentence is just so much, look, I can't justify it other than this is just who I am. I thought it was very
Michael,
very
where would you go with that?
In our first, I should say that that conversation was a kind of a one-off. We got into it as a tangent, quite frankly. The tangents are so often so very interesting. But if we were to go further, my hope would be to find a person who is in that other position, who would be able to explain her story, and perhaps even, you know, on an embodied level, and perhaps on a more ideological level, and then having, you know, kind of taught the group, if you will, how to hear, how to grant the other dignity and humanity, and to hear with credulity, that at the very least it would give her a sense of the other.
Mm-hmm.
I just say, working with families, you get these entrenched opposed positions, and one of the very useful tools, it's an obvious thing in one way, but to actually enact it, is agreeing to differ. That's such a useful thing. So at the end, you know, to think that you can ever bridge some of these divides is idealistic, but you can agree to differ and to get more understanding, and to help people learn to live with that difference.
There was something came up in our discussion.
I'm going to have to say we need one more comment. We're going to have to stop, I'm afraid. Would you like to choose who's going to make the last comment? There were two people who want to say something.
Can I ask one thing? There was something that came up in our conversation was, and it's common to everything that's been said since we came back from the groups, was how do you manage the power dynamics within that conversation, and how do you make sure that you're having the same conversation as the other person, and with can you have that conversation with someone outside of the structure of PCP if they don't understand what you're trying to do?
That's a really, really important point. And I think that's probably the one that we want to start addressing, perhaps in the conversation that we have as an adjunct to this one. It sounds like a very good jumping off point. Would you be in agreement with that? I think that might be a useful way to do it. I'm really sorry, I'm going to have to draw this to a close. This feels like we could be talking forever, really. I'm going to hand over to Harry, though, to pull things together and say goodbye formally. Harry, over to you.
Well, what I will do coming from that is to put all anyone who wants to anyway, to have an email group discussion. I mean, you could even have a Zoom discussion, but I think we don't want to bite off more than we can chew at this point. But we're learning as we go along with this series. If it may be that every one of the presentations ends up with a few people maybe, or maybe more than that, having some sort of discussion on email. Just want to thank everybody. It's really warms my heart that so many people have joined us, and I feel very heartened. It's going to be a good series. We were going to have a bit of a discussion about the process itself, but let's let that unfold as a conversation over the coming fortnights. I really just need to say now we should, I mean, we could just go on, couldn't we? But I think probably that would be bad practice. Psychotherapy sessions are supposed to stop after an hour, aren't they? So we've got an hour and a half. So I'll just say cheerio to all of you. Sorry I haven't been able to say hello properly to everybody. And David, I called you Bob. I'm sorry about that.
I'm flattered.
Any last words before we close up? None? Back to the Quaker meeting.
Don't judge us all by our country's leader. That's all I will say.
So
yes, respect the individual.
So will I. So will I.
Thank you very much, everybody, for coming.
Much obliged.
It's been so nice for us as well to see the fruition of all these weeks' work. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah.
We'll be back.
Excellent.
Take
And
care.
bring people on board. You know, you can get people to send me email to go on the list. Mike tells me that this system can take 300.
Harry, when can we see the recording?
Well, we did at one point say we'd only release them after the end of the series, but I reckon that should go out quite soon.
Yeah, please.
Don't you think?
Excellent. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea.
It's going to make a very nice piece of work.
Yeah.
And we can,
A
like we did
stimulus.
after them. Sorry.
A stimulus, really.
Yeah.
Great.
So I say good morning, good evening to all
Good
of
night.
you.
And see you. Good night.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye. All the best. Bye. Cheers.
All the best.
Cecily, I thought you were hoping to get to bed.
Yeah, I'm in my PJs.
Oh, that's great.
Eyeballs are hanging out. It's terrible.
Oh, well, have a good sleep in tomorrow morning, or is that not possible?
It could be, but I think I'll go to yoga and just chill out.
Good luck.
Thank you. I'll sleep tomorrow afternoon, maybe with my puppy dogs. Anyway, thanks, Michael.
You
That
will.
was wonderful.
Thank you, Desley. Good seeing you again.
Yeah, it's lovely to
Well.
see you too.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Friends.
Night.
Take care, Antonio. Take care, Claire.
Bye, Claire. Lewis, did you have trouble with the internet?
Yes, I did. Something happened. In fact, I'm right now connected through my iPhone because something failed with the Wi-Fi. I don't know, maybe something local in Barcelona, but I got connected through the iPhone in the last time.
Yeah. What's it like on an iPhone? I mean, I've got the full screen monitor. It must be tiny.
No, I'm looking at it through the MacBook screen, but the connection is through the 4G
Oh, I've got you.
in the iPhone, and in fact, it's better than Wi-Fi right now. The quality of the image is better right now for me. Wi-Fi is kind of unreliable. Sorry, Jelena?
Maybe we should stop the recording because we want to off chat.
Yes, let's do that.
Sorry.